US President Donald Trump has announced that the United States will send Patriot missile defence systems to Ukraine, adding that billions of dollars of US military equipment for Kyiv will be paid for by NATO. He said this was a chance for peace, adding he was disappointed with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He also warned that the US would impose very severe tariffs on Russia if no ceasefire deal is reached within 50 days.
For months, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had asked Washington for more US Patriot defence systems. Now that request has been given the green light. During a meeting this afternoon with NATO chief Mark Rutte at the White House, America's president confirmed that Ukraine would receive entire Patriot systems, not just missiles. And there was more news from Moscow.
And I'm disappointed in President Putin because I thought we would have had a deal 2 months ago, but it doesn't seem to get there. So based on that, we're going to be doing secondary tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. It's very simple.
Those sanctions would be set at 100% and target countries that buy Russian exports, which would hit India and China in particular, while new deliveries of US weapons to Ukraine will be paid for by NATO countries. Patriots are mobile, precision-guided systems that can take out cruise and ballistic missiles up to a range of 70 kilometres at all altitudes. Local Ukrainian media has reported that Ukraine currently has 8 Patriot systems, not enough to deal with Russia's escalating air war on its cities, which has intensified in recent weeks.
Always, sir. How are you, sir?
In Kyiv today, Mr. Trump's special envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, discussed the procurement of weapons with Ukraine's president and his officials, signalling that the Trump administration is acting fast on its policy change. The Kremlin has downplayed news about the Patriots, its spokesperson saying this morning that the US was already arming Ukraine. Nonetheless, arming Ukraine with more Patriots and threatening sanctions against Moscow signals a new phase in the Trump administration's efforts to get Russia to agree to a ceasefire. Liam Nolan, RT News.
Well, let's get the latest on this now from our Washington correspondent, Sean Whelan. Sean, President Trump hasn't yet managed to call Russia to heel like he promised he would and get an end to this war. Do his announcements today mark a significant policy change now?
I think they do, Sharon. I mean, if you recall, President Trump hasn't even brought himself to say that Russia started this war by invading Ukraine. He's been very cautious, very careful, very friendly towards Vladimir Putin, but he seems to have run out of patience with him. He said we were 4 times, I thought we were really close to having a deal to end this war. And every time he'd finish a phone call with Vladimir Putin, he'd say, that was a really nice phone call, get home. And Mrs. Trump would tell him, guess what, they've bombed another city in Ukraine. So he feels now at this stage that he's been basically made a fool of, played along, while the Russians have continued acting very aggressively in Ukraine, stepping up indeed their attacks on Ukrainian cities. And now he's decided, well, let's push back on this one. Let's supply weaponry to Ukraine, notably these Patriot defence systems, which the Ukrainians have been after for a while, to increase the amount of defences that they can bring to bear on their cities, but also a sanctions package. One has been under discussion in the United States Senate for several weeks, possibly months now, led by Senator Lindsey Graham, a very close ally of President Trump. He has managed to sign up 85 co-sponsors for that legislation amongst his fellow senators. That's 85 out of 100. So it's going to go through in the House, and that would allow up to 500% tariffs to be imposed on secondary countries, namely China and India, who are buying Russian oil and are therefore supporting the Russian war machine. President Trump at the moment is only talking about 100%. Nevertheless, that could be a significant impediment to Russia's aims. He's pushing them for a 50-day settlement on this. We shall see. But the Russians so far taking it that President Trump's tariff threats don't really amount to very much. The Moscow Stock Exchange has gone up on the news.
Sean Whelan from Washington, thank you.
EU trade ministers have been meeting in Brussels to discuss how to respond to President Trump's threat to impose a 30% tariff on imports from the EU from the 1st of August. The EU's Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič said the tariffs would effectively cut off transatlantic trade.
The US Ambassador to Ireland, Edward Walsh, arriving at the Department of Foreign Affairs today. Right across the EU, diplomacy moved up a gear as the threat of a transatlantic trade war loomed large. In Brussels, Europe's chief negotiator, Maroš Šefčovič, said tariffs of 30%, as threatened by Donald Trump, could almost derail EU-US trade.
So if you're talking about 30% or 30% plus, there will be a huge impact on trade. It will be almost impossible to continue the trading as we are used in a transatlantic relationship.
Ireland's EU Commissioner called on member states to stand together as the pressure from the US intensifies.
European unity among the member states is absolutely vital, and we have had outstanding support from the member states as a Commission up to now, and in the next 2.5 weeks or so it is crucial that that unity and that level of support is maintained.
The Department of Finance has modelled what the effect of US tariffs would be on the Irish economy, but none of that was based on tariffs of 30%. So that's work it's going to undertake now. Minister for Finance Paschal Donohoe said Ireland remained on a solid economic footing as it enters this uncertain period.
The application of tariffs at a high level would be bad for the economic growth of Ireland and would affect our future job potential, job creation potential. What the exact effect will be will depend on what the exact level of tariffs would be. And at this moment in time, with all of the unpredictability that is there, it's very difficult to forecast that.
All of this uncertainty makes it enormously difficult for businesses to commit money for investment, and investment equals jobs.
And David joins us now, as does our political correspondent Micheál Lehane, who is at Leinster House. David, clearly there's a real concern about this threat of 30% tariff, and also a sense that maybe the EU didn't see this coming.
Yeah, I think that what happened was that last week European capitals were briefed by the European Commission that the talks seemed to be going relatively well. They were hopeful of reaching a framework agreement in a few days. And then came Donald Trump's bombshell over the weekend, a threat of 30% tariffs. But he has previously threatened 20% tariffs on the EU, 50% tariffs on the EU. He's threatened taxes on pharmaceuticals of 25%, even 200%. He's moved dates from April to July the 9th and now August the 1st. Many people involved are saying, let's just make our judgment on the basis of what the US does and not just what Donald Trump says.
OK, David, thanks for that. And Micheál, while the negotiations are going on in Brussels, politicians here trying to help them along as well.
Well, yes, the Taoiseach is speaking to the new US Ambassador, Edward Walsh, and emphasising the huge volume of trade between Ireland and the US and the EU and the US, and even saying that there are people working in the Irish companies in the US who would have voted for Donald Trump. Now, Simon Harris described Edward Walsh as a close contact and friend of the US president. And this was his assessment of how he thinks Donald Trump is handling these negotiations at the moment.
He wishes to. It's not the way we'd like to do it. We prefer to do things by sitting around a table, trashing out the detail, and then getting to a good place. I think we were very close to that last week, of having at least a short framework agreement to calm things down. It's regrettable that that didn't get over the line, but I still remain confident it can happen in the days ahead, should there be a willingness on the part of the United States to do it. There's definitely a willingness from the EU to do that.
I suppose despite that optimistic note, really, there was an admission from the Taoiseach that Europe has to prepare for all situations. And I suppose there is the reality too that government is now trying to prepare a summer economic statement that will set the parameters of the budget and indeed finalise a national development plan in the midst of what is unpredictable and uncertain economic times.
OK, thanks for that. Micheál Lehane in Leinster House and David Murphy here in studio.